So you're one of the original co-founders of the South Australian Aviation Museum. Can you tell us a little bit about the history and why you started the museum?
Gee whiz, that's a big
question.
You got about an hour?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it all goes back to my interest in aviation for a start. I decided, I went and learnt to fly, but I didn't decide to become a pilot. I decided that was too hard. I couldn't land very well. And I then was in New Guinea, and when I was in New Guinea, part of my job as a patrol officer was to walk around. We went out all the villages all over the place, and we had to go looking for wrecked aircraft from the war and check them. And then I did that, and when I did that, I started discovering the history of the planes and the people, and that got me sort of interested in aviation history, and particularly in history. And then when I came back to Australia and went to live in Alice Springs, we had that terrible disaster at Alice Springs Airport where that pilot flew into the Connellan hangar on a suicide thing and killed Eddie Connellan's son. And from that, we started looking at the story of Connellan Airways, and then we went and started the Alice Springs Museum.
Oh, okay.
And
what year was that?
Now that was about 1975, 76. And then in 1984, the family wanted to leave Alice Springs and come to Adelaide. And I came down with the family, we got all settled in, and then someone said, we need an aviation museum in Adelaide. Oh, right. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. Yeah. And so I went to the initial meeting down at the Maid of Auckland Hotel, and from there we went to the Pier Street garage, I think it was down in Glenelg, and we got a group of people and we just started from there. And I became the initial treasurer. But I just found the history and the aeroplanes. And then when you go a bit further, it's the people who fly them, the people who maintain them, people who are connected to them.
Finding a building that suited what you were doing?
First of all, we got the Pier Street garage, which was going to be pulled down. So we had that for minimal rent. That was just behind the Stanford Grand. Oh, yes. So it was not far to go to the pub. And then we decided, we were offered by the Development Commission here or someone, the Mundy Street shed down the other side there, because that was vacant. And they were very keen to get some sort of museum thing going in the port. And so we went into there. That had its challenges. You used to give, when we did have visitors, we gave them an umbrella on a rainy day because it was pretty bad. But we got started there. And then one day I was driving around the port and we found the current hangar out there sitting over on the other side of the road. And I thought, this is empty. I said, this has got to be better than what we got. So we just simply went to the right authorities and they said, no, that's a great idea, Ocean Steamers Road. So they gave it to us on a no rental sort of lease basis. And we then stayed there until they decided to build a bridge.
Oh, right.
And then they said, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, you could move the hangar over here. And they said, yeah, well, why not? So
you moved the hangar?
We moved the hangar. We didn't do it, they did. But it's a genuine World War II hangar. Yeah. It's a heritage listed thing if you want to do that, because it was designed for the Royal Navy in the Shetland Islands, and then moved to Darwin when all the hangars were bombed, and then moved down here as a wool store.
Oh, great. So it's quite significant.
Oh, it's a very significant building. It's all in 6 foot lengths so that you can transport it.
And you do need a vast area, obviously. I mean, aircraft are not small.
No, they're not. But the thing I liked about the building was it was so historic in itself. It was genuine World War II, and it was built as an aircraft hangar, a designed hangar. The Pentad, it's very good. It's a very good design.
What was the first aircraft?
Ooh.
Testing you now.
Was that Avro Anson? Yeah, we went out. There were quite a lot of them lying around in farmers' paddocks up around Malala.
Why were they so common?
Because at the end of the war, Malala was a training centre for everyone, and at the end of the war, they just simply parked them along the edge of the runway, and said to farmers, for a few dollars, you can have one. Now, after the war, wheels, parts, bolts, nuts, everything was in short supply. So they'd go along and they'd cut the wings off, because they were one-piece wooden wing, and hook them up behind their tractor and tow them home. And this one was towed from Malala airfield to the farmer's property, and it just sat there and decayed.
Oh, right.
And he
so
just
what
took the bits off
condition
it.
was it in?
Oh, shocking.
Right.
It's
okay.
completely deteriorated.
Yes.
But the frame was there, lots of parts,
That's right.
something you had to start from. And that was the first aircraft. Yeah.
Were the other aircraft donated, or did you find them, or?
Wow. No, they didn't all come easily.
No, right.
And in the early days, they didn't come complete. Probably the biggest acquisition was our DC-3, the C-47 from Edinburgh that crashed out there. That went up for tender as scrap, and the government wouldn't give it to us. So as an organisation that had about $500 in the bank, we had to find $15,000 to buy it.
So how did you raise that money?
Borrowed it from a bank.
Oh.
And then worked out how to repay it.
Oh,
I was one of the people who went guarantor for the loan.
that's risky.
Yeah, well, not
But I suppose
really.
if you love what you're doing, you're happy to risk
Well,
that.
I got a particular love for DC-3s because I
Yes.
worked with them in New Guinea.
Oh, did you?
Oh,
Right.
yeah, and I know, just the greatest. They used
Yeah.
to supply us with everything we needed. And they're just a great aeroplane. They were not very comfortable in bad weather, I can tell you, but never mind. And so we actually paid the government for that, and then we got support to pull it apart and move it into the shed down at Mundy Street.
Oh, okay.
And the only way we could get it into the shed was to take the whole end wall off. And that's where Steve Nitschke came in. So we took the
Yes.
whole end wall off and towed it in and then put the wall back.
Because that's quite a thing. When you look around the hangar, you've got so many aircraft here, and it's the logistics really behind it of how you get these aircraft in. Some of them I know you've had to take wings off to get them in, and also to move them around. If you get new aircraft in, you're having to then shift them around as well. So that's quite a logistical problem, I think.
See, Suzie, it's a nightmare. Now that we've got quite a few aircraft in there, it's really getting hard.
Yes, I bet.
Something is going to have to give.
Yes.
But this museum isn't like others. We've worked on the policy that if we can't keep it undercover, we won't have it.
Okay.
And we have tried very hard to keep to that collection policy, that if it hasn't got a connection to South Australia.
So that's the criteria.
That's our criteria.
Right.
Now, we do make exceptions. Obviously, the Spitfire was one, and that's not ours, that's a loan job. The helicopter out there is another one, simply because they're so hard to find, and the public love them. So you have occasionally this sort of, what would you say, public appeal thing. But the majority of aircraft we went looking for. But in the early days, you just simply had to take what you could get. But as we've got more established, we're knocking them back.
And you are able to have collections as well. So you might not necessarily have the aircraft, but you'll have the collections, say with the Vimy, you don't have the aircraft here, but you can have the collection, which is part of the Sir Ross and Keith Smith.
Yeah, that's a good point you make.
Yeah.
What really happened was all the other stuff that goes along with the aircraft, with the history, starts arriving. Because all these people say, look, I've got this, what do I do with it? And so they'd give it to us, and then so you start a library.
Yes, because you've got quite an extensive library here now,
Yeah.
haven't you? That's right.
And
Yes.
then there's a digital photo collection.
Yes.
So you get that. And then you get all the posters. And then you get all the aircraft parts.
And you've only got so much wall space as well for all the prints and the
You
posters.
can't do it all.
That's right.
Yeah, it's been a very big challenge to develop things as it goes along and learn the skills.
Because you're not just a museum, you're also like an archive as well, and a library.
Well, I can give you an example. When they were going to move the Vimy a couple of years ago, the only place that had any plans for the Vimy in Australia were here. We had a full set, and we couldn't get them out of the museum couldn't get them out of the UK because of COVID. So we were the only ones that actually had that set of plans. So it's all that work pays off. If you want to restore something to what it was, you need to go back to those records.
Yes, and that's one of the questions I wanted to ask actually. So when you do rescue an aircraft, say the ferry battle, which is behind you, sometimes you have to work from the maker's plate, is it?
Yeah, we've got that for this one. The worst thing about the ferry battle is the plans were lost in the UK, and there's just a handful of plans. The fellas that are doing this are doing it pretty much off the cuff in some ways. Fortunately, we found some wrecks, and we've used those parts as patterns to help rebuild. But yeah, no, you're really walking around in the dark at times.
I know this was, Nigel had a lot to do with this, but
Yeah.
can you give me a little bit of a background on the ferry battle?
This particular one was crashed, landed outside Port Pirie in the swamps, and they found it, and Nigel and a whole group from I can't remember the name of the group, the aircraft group they had, went up and salvaged it, what was left. There was mainly just the wing section, centre section, and they sent it up, and a bloke took it to Mildura, Pierce Dunn, and it stayed up there. And then somewhere along the line, one of our members, Steve Nitschke, thought this would be a great project. So he swapped some parts in an aircraft he had, and he brought that back down here. And we then looked at it and said, well, this is only the fourth one in the world. This is really important, and it's the only one in Australia. So maybe we should get our hands on it. So we swapped Steve Nitschke a Windjill for this. And we've been working on it ever since. But it's making great progress. The best part I found about this was I hunted down parts all over the world.
Just the research behind it
The
as well.
research,
Yes.
the contacts that you make. We got a lot of help from Hendon, the RAF Museum, and they gave us a set of wings that was sitting up there, ready to go on. Well, they got a little work first. And then, yeah, we found parts in Belgium, Canada. Yeah, they just turned up. Well, then we've accumulated all these parts, and we've found some really good workers, and you can see for yourself, they're getting stuck into it.
So David, you have 170 volunteers approximately. So what do they do here?
Well, they're not all active. We now probably have about 60 or so that are really active, but they do a range of things. They work the desk, because that's all volunteer, 7 days a week. They work in the library. They work out in the workshop. They do displays, restore aircraft. Yeah, but we're getting to a point where it's fairly skilled work out in the workshop, so you can't just get anybody anymore. We've got to get skilled people. If
you could choose any aircraft, and obviously it would have to be connected to South Australia, what would you choose to have here next?
Next?
Yes.
I haven't got any room.
If you had room.
Oh my goodness me, where did you deem that one up from? Gosh. We probably should be moving into something like a Royal Flying Doctor aircraft that worked in South Australia. I think we've got a gap in our collection on that one. The RFDS out in the northwest and up in the north of the state in particular are pretty important part of aviation. And I wouldn't mind finding something we want one for South Australia. We don't just want any RFDS aircraft. We'll find one day.
What do you think is the future for the museum?
I think we have to head, and this may seem a bit controversial, but we could have to start getting more into space. And we're going to have to perhaps rename ourselves to become the Aerospace Museum. And because the younger generation aren't interested particularly, or they haven't got the historical background to appreciate some of these aircraft and what we're doing. So I think we're going to have to move a little more into the space field and into the technology field and drone and all that sort of history, because it's all developing rapidly, and that may get some of the younger people in. But I think younger volunteers have got a time problem, not easy to get, although volunteers seem to be lasting longer, thank goodness. I'm all for that. And but it's a big worry. It's a big worry.
And as you know, I have a background with Woomera because I was born there. That would blend nicely, obviously, into that aerospace museum.
Well, we've got that Woomera collection that's out there. We're just reworking now. And what we want to do is we've got one firm lined up, and they're going to bring in a display on their current technology and where they are with space in South Australia. The sad thing is people don't remember that we were in space in South Australia way before anybody else was. And so we want to connect the past and the present, and that's one of our new displays that'll be coming up soon.
With the volunteers, what drives them to come here week to week? Obviously, some of these aircraft that they're working on are taking several years to complete, and some of them actually won't see the completion. What do you think drives them?
First of all, there's a very strong interest in aviation. It's a very small circle in Australia, aviation. It doesn't take long to get to know anyone all over the place. So it's only a small group. So finding like-minded people isn't that easy. And the museum represents a place where if you've got an interest in aviation, this is where you can come. You can look at the history of it if you want to, join the history group, write stories, work in the library, actually do work. You can run tours. So it's that love of aviation and the history of aviation that I think drives people. The other thing that we've noticed over the last few years is that a lot of RAAF people are retiring, and we've got quite a little group here of ex-RAAF people. And we've also got engineers who these people worked on planes all their life. And I think they just don't know how to stop.
That's right.
And they love it.
I know you'll remember me bringing my father in here. He was about 91 at the time, and you took him on a tour. For him, that was a bit of a sort of walk down memory lane. Is that one of the major reasons why people do come back to a place like this?
Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons why the volunteers like to be involved too, because finding those what we call old timers, the people who were the pioneers, and talking to them brings history to life. It really does bring it to life, and that's part of it. I think some people love doing tours, and it's really good to talk to those people and get the history. But I think the volunteers are just genuinely motivated by aviation, and it's like a big men's shed too. I mean, it is. It's a massive men's shed.
But when you look at the museum and where it started as well, you must have a sense of pride. For me, I came in here and I felt quite at home here. I mean, obviously, I've been brought up with a history of aviation as well. How do you feel?
Amazed. What we've achieved is just astonishing. And I step back and look at it and think, we've now got in a point where the RAAF ring us up and say, do you want an F-18? I thought, when you hit that mark, you think, we must be doing something right. But we are doing something right. We are accredited. We try to do it properly. We try to look after everything, look after our members, because I feel one of the things I like is the fact that our members can come down and feel at home. And when they're having problems in their life and other things, this is a place to come. It's a home, away from home in a way, but it's the assembly of the history. And for future generations, for schools and others to come down here and appreciate that life wasn't all just a jet at 40,000 feet. It was a prop-driven aircraft at 10,000 feet, and pretty bumpy one at that. And it's just great to see the whole history come alive.
That's right. You've got quite an extraordinary collection here, obviously from vintage aircraft through to you've got the jets here as well. You've got a F-111, which obviously does like Mach 2.5.
Yeah.
And then you have aircraft that probably go a lot slower than that.
I think one of the things I think is interesting is it keeps up. We've shown the change in technology. If you go and look at the F-111, next to it is a model of the Vimy. One did 100 miles an hour and the other one could do, as you say, Mach 2.5 or something, and they're only 50 years apart. Now, that is astonishing technology. And I think that's what we need to show people, that how fast this has happened. In fact, it's happening too fast. Museums can't keep up with it. It's just too hard. But we've got to look after the past, and so the future can be, people in the future can see what happened and hear the stories. And it's getting the stories that's important too. It's not just the aeroplanes. It's the stories behind them. That's what's important.
What's your favourite aircraft of all time?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. The Douglas DC-3 out there, I worked with them in New Guinea. They were our lifeblood. We loaded them. I saw them crash. I'd been to wrecks. They're just astonishing aircraft. They're so versatile and for their day, and they were made like tanks. We loaded Jeeps and Land Rovers, tractors, generators, food, everything, and just piled it all in and off they went. But they were a workhorse, but they were our lifeline. They bought us everything we needed living up in the mountains somewhere. And yeah, so I built up a great affection for those aeroplanes, yeah.
Well, thank you, David.
That's all right.